Yeah, that was the idea.
All right.
Yeah. So it was a while back when we spoke the last time, but what's been going on? What's on your mind?
Um, it's right now is kind of a transition slash sabbatical, I guess. I wrote articles for over 6 years, every Sunday, never missed a week. And now it's like I've taken a break, and it's kind of nice and it's kind of not. And I'm just sort of in this, this I guess it's like a transition, and it's like a sabbatical. I don't know. I'm kind of seeing where things are going. There's some other extenuating circumstances that are involved that I don't really care to talk about. It's not that good or bad thing. It's just some personal stuff, And I'm just kind of waiting to see. I think I have about a 6-month period of time where I'm just kind of waiting to see where things head, I guess is the best way to put it. So
Yeah. I recently heard that just like we're active at times and we're not at other times in the day, that like as humans, if we pay attention to our lives and we look back, we actually have years that go in this fluctuation, like years of like lots of activity followed by years where we need some more kind of regroup.
Yeah. It's I don't know. It's just there's so many things. I'm constantly reviewing my life, my situation, because I still want to have daily growth, or at least see, oh, you know what? Here's something that happened today. I need to contemplate this, think about it. I need to make it part of my daily growth process. I don't have a chart that I write. I don't have any particular system. It's just like I sort of allow it to happen every day. I want to, something might happen. I might even forget about it. I don't know, but I want to try to make sure that something daily occurs. And so right now, I almost think about what direction do I want to head, where I want to go, because I take a 3-pronged approach, right? I can write, work with people, and then speak. The public speaking is probably not anything where I'm going to focus at, because those are people who, athletes, celebrities, people who've accomplished something. Maybe somebody who is a great life coach turns to speaking, or a great writer turns to speaking. But I don't think people start off as speaker, because who wants to listen to somebody who doesn't have a really interesting story? I mean, everybody in life has a story. I keep telling people my story is probably not going to make a very good movie, because there's nothing really that exciting about it. Have there been exciting parts? Sure. But, I never picked up lock, stock, and barrel and moved to another country. I haven't done these kinds of, I've done small things. The little things in my life that were big impact are almost kind of like, wow, that's a little boring. Something happened to your video.
Yeah, someone's.
Are you there? Oops, you're not even there anymore. Oh, bummer. Here you come. Oops. All right, are you there?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Okay, you're back.
Yeah, sorry about that.
All right. So you're still recording. Okay. So and my story is not a bad thing for me, but if I were to say, oh, I'm gonna go on the circuit speaking, I don't, I love talking about healing and shame and all those kinds of things. And if you were to say, hey, John, I need you to speak tonight about, I'm there. It's not a problem. I can do it. But somebody, a guy who's going to speak is typically somebody who, like I say, an athlete, somebody who has performed a great accomplishment, and people, they want to come see that person and hear the story, where mine is not really that way. Now, believe me, if I were sitting on a panel talking about shame and Brene Brown was on the panel, I wouldn't feel intimidated at all. I mean, I should say perhaps a little bit. Obviously, she's well known for that, but I really feel like I could contribute to the conversation because of all the writing and studying and thinking I've done on it. But does that give me the credit to go on a national circuit? Not necessarily, So these are the things that I'm kind of thinking about. What do I do next? And in the meantime, I got my day job that pretty much pays the bill that I really can't neglect, So that's why it's kind of this transition sabbatical period for me in terms of my passion with shame and emotional healing. So that's kind of where I am anyways.
That's cool. Yeah. I'm kind of in the opposite direction. I feel like I'm starting to take off with what I'm trying to do here.
Good. That's excellent.
Yeah. I mean, like the program that I have it's like, I think it's a really, really powerful synergy of like a number of tools that I kind of, don't just like fire them at like one issue, but try to like, fire them everywhere within a person's life. And I think that like for people who are ready for like a massive change, it's a really powerful way for them to get to places that they are just dying to get to, but they don't know how to.
Yeah, good. Is this a program that you've developed? Is it somebody else that you've done training with?
Yeah, so it's a combination of things that it's like all the stuff I've trained at, but none of them together. So I kind of put them together, and also, throughout the years of practice with them, I kind of made them my own. And what I do, which I think is unique, is most of these tools are taught for one person to do on another person. So like, coach asks the question, or healer asks, does this technique or whatever. And what I do is I start by doing it on people, but then I train people how to do it on themselves, because I do that myself. And when I do them on myself, I think that there's advantage to both when you have someone facilitating and when you do it on your own. But I think that the advantage of doing it on your own is that, number one, to some level, it's deeper, because in some ways, yourself better than anyone else. And also, by you doing it on yourself, you kind of are empowering yourself. And the other thing is, the practical aspect of it is, when you can do it on yourself, it's always available to you. Like when someone goes to a coach or a therapist or someone, like, they're going to do that at most twice a week. That's a lot. Most of the times it's once a week, and that's also a lot. It's a lot financially, it's a lot in terms of time. Yeah. But when you can apply these things to yourself at any time in 10, 15 minutes of a day, that makes, that gives you a lot of firepower in terms of how do you move forward. Because like, I've been through many different processes where I had to hire someone to help me, and it was like, either there wasn't enough time in between the sessions to really like process one before another, or there was too much time in between. And I think by people having tools that help them process and also continue on work, it makes their growth go a lot faster, and it's much more empowering.
Oh, interesting. All right.
Yeah. So I'm kind of taking off with this, and it's like, the more I experiment with it and I play with it, the more it's like I'm kind of becoming shocked by how it's like I feel like I'm onto something, and it's a little bit
Okay,
shocking.
for you. That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
So tell me, like, I don't remember if we spoke about this the first time, but how did like shame become, like, what's the story behind shame for you? How did that become the thing that you focus on?
Pretty much. Um, in 2011, my first marriage hit a bump it wasn't able to overcome. And we tried to work it out. And and then in the following March 2012, we found this therapist and we started to go individually as well as group. And after about 4-5 sessions, my ex says, "That's it, I'm done. I swear on my kids, my grandkids, I'm getting a divorce." I hadn't given up then. Well, but eventually we decided to split. But I'm going to stay on because 22 years of marriage and all of a sudden, bam, something's wrong. I got to get this fixed. And so I really enjoyed this therapist, and I came into the whole session of, okay, I want to fix this. So tell me what I need to do. Tell me what books I need to read. Tell me how I need to think. Tell me all these things, right? And I realized that was the problem. The problem was I'm trying to find answers from somebody else. Somebody else needs to tell me I'm really good at following directions. Somebody else needs to tell me what to do, right? Well, we went through this, long story short, and I finally realized that this whole idea of shame had haunted me from the time I was a kid. Because I remember also going to see this therapist thinking, look, don't make me lie down on a couch and start asking me about my childhood, because I'm in crisis mode now, right? Screw my childhood. Let's solve the problem. But I realized all the problems that were happening today began when I was a kid. And it's kind of ironic because I want to fix it now, but you can't fix it until you see what caused the problem. And I realized that shame, or how I defined shame as the negative things that we've come to believe about who we were and are. And what I say is the things that we believe, that's the key. Believe and accept. This is the kind of person I am. I can't change because I'm too short, worthless, stupid, whatever negative thought about yourself you want to include there. But it's only shame when we accept it. How many times do people go through, I'm getting off track here, but how many times do people go through life and I can't dance, I'm clumsy. Well, why are you clumsy? Because when you were a kid, you knocked something over and everybody laughed and called you clumsy and you just accepted that fact. It's like, I'm clumsy, I can't fix it. Certain things. And I mean, even like when you say I'm too short, sure, you can't fix that, but you can overcome that. That doesn't have to be an excuse. We don't have to believe we don't have to believe those things. People overcome these things. People lose an arm. They don't use that as an excuse. You could say, wow, I'm only half a person now because I only got one arm. Or you could say, you know what? I'm going to do better than that guy that's got two arms. So, there's things that we can do. So I got a little bit off course, but I realized at the age of 52, 53, that all these negative things, it wasn't what people told me that was the problem. The problem was that I accepted what they told me, that I believed it. And that brings the responsibility back to me. I have to own it. You know what? Yes, these horrible things happen. And those are part of my stories. But I also believed it. What they told me, I accepted it. So yes, it's their fault for doing it, but it's also my fault for accepting it. Now, again, in certain situations, like in rape or if you're getting physically beaten, there's a different way to handle that. That wasn't my case. I was just told things by people whom I respected, loved, and admired, not necessarily my parents. Okay, My parents really weren't the issue, but I accepted these things. And that's what sort of kept me held back all this time. That's why when I got into my marriage, she had already had three kids. I was coaching them, believe it or not. I became their stepdad. And now my whole idea was, tell me what I need to do to be a good dad. Tell me what I need to do to be a good husband. And everything was because I wasn't worthy enough to have these answers revealed to me. And this whole idea of shame, it just one day it just hit me in the session. It's like, wow, I get it now. I get it. It's that I'm the one, by pointing at somebody else. Now I'm also, not only am I kind of blaming them, I'm giving them the responsibility of making me the person that I am. And I can't do that. We have to be responsible to make the person that we are. And because it became so, I became so hyper, I'm going to say hyper aware. When that the session that happened, it was February 22nd, 2013. I'll never forget the day, right? I walked out of that session and I was so aware. I got in my home and I'm like, I'm turning right. Is that because of shame or not? I mean, I asked that question about everything. I'm on my way home. It's late at night. Should I stop and buy something or should I go home and cook something? Is that shame? You know, am I not even worthy enough to stop and buy some fast food? Yeah, you know, everything I measured, I asked that question. Now, it was overkill, don't get me wrong, because it doesn't happen, but there are a lot of times when shame causes us to make those decisions. So I became extremely aware. I started observing it in others. Now, the big mistake that I made was I was a little bit too forward with my perception of them. You know, it's wrong for me to tell somebody that shame, you shouldn't do that, because it's not for me to tell them, right? It's for people to understand that. But it became a method for me to observe it and see it. So when somebody would ask me questions, I was able to figure out ways to help them to understand it. You know, not for me to say, well, yes, it is shame. It's my job to help them discover whether or not it is. And all this hypersensitivity became it just helped me. It was a tool that helped me show people or guide people, as I like to say, to come to that conclusion. You know, people will ask me my opinion on occasion, but my answer is this. I said, well, I can't tell you whether or not it was for you, but if I were in your shoes, and if I was making that choice, here's what my thought process would be. And I would start to explain it. And they would say, oh yeah, you know what, you're right. I'm like, no. I'm not saying that's what you're doing. I'm saying that's what I would do. Because I don't want them to think that I'm hinting or, you know, or something. This is your fault. And I wanted people to insist, no, John, stop. That's it. You're right. That's exactly what I'm thinking. When they get to that point, then it's not me telling them it's shame. They have come up with the idea, or possibly they've taken a spin on what I've said and made it their own. And I firmly believe that shame is the biggest problem that most of us will ever face. And it's one of the least talked about and least understood things that we ever go through. And it's really sinister. I talk of shame almost as though it's its own separate entity, but it's really not. It's us. It's like the example I give is, you know, there's commercials where they have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, right? And this angel's trying to convince you to do the right thing, and the devil's saying, no, do the naughty thing. Well, shame is like there's a devil on your shoulder, but no angel here. And it's not trying to get you to do wrong. It's this whole amalgamation of these horrible things. Oh, John, you can't do that. You're not worthy of that. You're not smart. You've done too many things not to do. And it's telling, because this is what we've been telling ourselves for all these years. And when we can see it this way, we look at it like, hey, it's this entity that's trying to get us to do the shameful thing, but it's really not an entity. It's us. It's who we believe we are. And those are the kinds of things that skew our own perception of ourselves. Like you were saying earlier, nobody knows yourself better than you do. And Yeah, that's a yes and no, because nobody knows really what goes on deep down in your heart. But when I went through my divorce, when in the very beginning, I told you May 11th to May 2011 was when it happened. If you came to me April 2011 and said, John, you don't really love your wife like you really should, I would have strongly objected. I would have said, Ari, you're crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. There's no man alive that's been married for 20 years that loves his wife as much or more than I do, because I didn't want to believe that I didn't. But now I know. Did I love her? Yes. Did I love her enough to be in love in a marriage? No, because too many things had happened that broke the mutual connection. That's a whole other story besides this one. But what I'm trying to say is that I wasn't going to believe the truth because I didn't want to believe the truth. That's what shame does to us. What kind of a horrible person would be married for 20 years to somebody and not love them as much or more than anybody else? Can you believe what a horrible, rotten person that guy would be? You see what I would tell myself, why I didn't want to believe the truth? So that's what shame does to us. It clouds our vision, because it's been telling us for most of our lives, even before we begin to speak sometimes, that we are this unworthy shape, or whatever kind of adjective we want to throw at ourselves. Whew, that was a long one, Ari.
Yeah. So it kind of it's interesting, the way you describe it, it got my thoughts running back. And the story in the very beginning of the Bible with Adam and Eve, and they eat from the forbidden fruit, the forbidden tree. And the first result of that was they felt shame. They're like, oh, why are we naked? We have to cover ourselves.
Sure.
Their first, so, I mean, I always knew shame was something out there, but the way you describe it as it being this kind of this essential hurdle that everyone has to face, it kind of, in a way, reminds me of that story, because that seems to be like that's kind of like the original, the state that the original sin puts us into is one of shame.
Good point. All right, are you ready for step 2 to get your mind blown?
Oh, sure.
Okay. In my book, I talk about shame on many levels, because there's shame that we experience on a personal level. There's shame that affects every relationship. Obviously if you're married, if you're with a partner, there's this shame that's a fine dance between you, which is sort of a collective shame, because you have shame, your partner has shame, and then there's some involved in the relationship. It involves in the family. It gets involved in the business. It gets involved as a country. I, as an American, can feel ashamed of something that our country has done. I don't want to get political at this point, because but I can say, wow, I'm ashamed to be an American. Now that's different from I'm ashamed to be me. But you know what I mean? So you have this macro level of shame. I'm ashamed to be a human being because I can't believe how treacherous our fellow human beings are treating the other fellow human beings. You see what I mean? So there's this shame on this huge macro level. So there's so many of it. It's almost as if there exists, I don't know, this whole entity of shame out there that is creating all this doubt, all these difficulties, but it's hidden, it's camouflaged. We can't, like you say, I never really thought about it. And I look at that as, well, it makes all sense in the world, because shame doesn't want to know it exists. Because how do you get rid of it? You acknowledge it. You realize it's there. Once it's there, you can take steps. You know what? I'm really not that unworthy. I've just been telling myself, I've been living that lie all those years. That's how you destroy shame. You see it, you expose it. So it's got to stay hidden. It's got to stay camouflaged. Otherwise, it loses its power. And is it this insidious entity? I don't know. I think of it that way because I think it helps people understand it. Whether it really exists that way, I don't know, but it doesn't really matter, because what it matters is how Ari deals with his own shame personally in his relationships with others. That's what matters. It doesn't matter something else out there exists that's trying to do this to you, because it doesn't matter what's trying. You realize that I need to fight it. I need to take the steps. I need to see and do what you need to do to defeat it, just like I need to do it in my life, and we do it in our relationships. So if it is out there, that's not the point. The all these metaphors and these ways I'm describing it help us. I only use it to help people understand that, whoa, it is a problem, and I need to become aware of it, because the awareness is actually the first step to changing or defeating it.
Yeah. So what is, if a person is trying to figure out, like, in a given situation, if there's shame involved, or they want to work on shame, like what is there like a kind of an inquiry or a way in which they can approach that to help kind of shine some light and awareness of where they might be having
Yes.
shame?
You actually asked an excellent and insightful question. There's a particular word that is out there, and I'm going to ask you the question. If you don't get it, it's fine. There's a word that we often confuse with shame. We say them often together. Do you know what I'm talking about? Okay, it's guilt. People,
Okay.
oh, there's guilt and there's shame, right? Well, there's a distinct difference. In my mind, that's the first step to understanding shame is it, because, I hear people all the time saying, oh, there's guilt. I have guilt and shame. You can have those at the same time, but what's the difference? And I'm going to explain the difference, and then I'm going to tell you a story to describe the difference. All right. Guilt, first of all, I want to start with the reason it's so hard to discern the difference is because we experience both of their symptoms physically the same. When we have emotions of guilt, like me, we might feel butterflies in our stomach. We might have this horrible feeling. For me, I get butterflies and I get tired. I want to go to sleep, almost like if I go to sleep, the problems don't exist, right? So we experience both the emotion of shame and guilt physically in the same response. That's one of the reasons why it's hard. But guilt, that's the negative feelings we get when we've made a bad choice or a wrong decision. Shame is the negative feelings we get when we believe that there's something innately wrong with us. Okay, it's not that we made a bad choice. It's we're a bad person because of whatever. Now, let me give you an example. Let's say we're having a discussion and I get really upset with you and I yell and get angry and say something really embarrassing on your podcast, right? And I'm all done. I'm like, wow, John, you shouldn't have done that. I mean, you see how bad Ari feels. You see all this time and effort he put into it. Yeah, that was really a dumb choice. That's feeling of guilt. I need to remember what this bad feeling is. So next time I'm in the situation, I can change my behavior. That's guilt. Shame would say, wow, John, you know why you yelled at Ari? Because you're an idiot. You're stupid. You can't help yourself from being this blatant, loud babble mouth, right? Shame tells me there's something wrong with me. I didn't make a bad choice. I'm just this pathetic person that made this choice. Where if we can look at things as guilt, we can say, I'm not a bad person. At heart, I just made a bad choice. And let's take steps to fix it. So that's when I work with people, the first thing I want them to understand, and believe me, the first thing I do in every session, what's the difference between guilt and shame? I have them explain it until I feel that they're comfortable. If they're stuttering or if I have to help them, we're going to repeat it the next session, because they need to know that guilt is a bad choice, a bad decision. Shame is, that something feeling that we're bad. And first, I want them to make that distinction, because that's really important, because if we don't understand, if we continue to think that there's something innately wrong with us that can't change, we won't. We've just sealed our own destiny. I mean, again, and there are things, I don't speak the language, I'm too short. There are these kinds of things, but that's not because of shame. That's just the way things are. That's something that we can't change, and we can't use as an excuse in life. Otherwise, we're going to find everything to use an excuse. But once we realize that the mistake that it's guilt rather than shame, we can take the next step in figuring out, okay, how do I change my way of thinking? How do I no longer believe that I'm unworthy? How do I no longer believe that I'm stupid? How do I no longer believe that I'm clumsy? And then we, again, there are myriad ways to go forth from there. And that would have to depend on the particular person I'm working with at the time to see what the next steps that we would take. Did that help you answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in I studied Jewish mysticism for a few years,
Okay.
and the subject of returning to God, of getting closer to Him, or it's translated as repentance, but it's more about like returning and becoming close. And there's different kinds, and there's a distinction that's made there that reminds me of what you're talking about, which is there's a distinction between a situation where the essential connection is there, but something was done that was harmful, and that act needs to be repaired, which in that case is a situation of a guilt. You feel guilty about what you did, but but essentially everything is still intact. So if you regret the action and you commit to not doing it again, and you confess about what you did, then it's kind of everything is fine. But then there's when an action is repeated many times, or when there's certain things that are done, this could be either between people or between a person and their God, there's a severance of the essential connection. To some degree, the essential connection has been severed. And in that case, there's a deeper damage to the relationship, where it's not enough, where guilt is not enough, because what are you guilty about? Whatever was done so many times, or was so horrible, that in order to have done such a thing, you must be missing something. There must be something that's really wrong. And that kind of reminds me of a situation where there's shame, meaning you feel that in your entire being, you're somewhat off in your whole being. And so there needs to be almost a deeper work that's done, that it's more about I regret what I did, now I'm going to fix it. And oddly enough, it's not about actually being sad or depressed that's going to repair that. On the contrary, it doesn't help. When there's a situation like that, it doesn't help for there to be sadness, or because all that's going to do is reinforce the shame. It just reinforces that you're so distant and you're so far. So that's not going to get you any closer. The only way to get closer at that point is actually to remember the joy of the bond and the connection, to actually do things that rekindle a sense of oneness, of unity. So it's kind of like, if I have a friendship and I did something to piss off my friend, so that I feel guilty about, and I would say, I'm sorry I did this, and apologize, and hopefully it'll get better. But if I do something that was totally embarrassed him and was completely out of line, something that would completely sever the friendship, the sorry is not going to cut it. I would have to find a way to create a bonding experience that got back to where things were before that happened.
Sure. But you also, here's the thing. Again, I've never really studied Jewish religion, anything other than outside of the Old Testament. Okay. So when you're talking about a communication with God versus communication with human being, this is what I know, and I may be wrong. When you talk about with God, you have a being that's omnipotent, right? That that can understand, that understands why we may have done certain things. We got a fellow human being. If you've done, let's say you've done, or I've done something to a fellow human being that completely embarrassed him and then destroyed the relationship, yes, if I'm going to get that back, I do need to somehow figure out how to mend that. But if that person says, you know what, John, I don't even want to know that you exist anymore, and I don't care to, then everything that I do, it doesn't matter. It's going to all be for naught. I can do something that can completely sever the relationship where the other person is not going to want to have anything to do with me. Now, how does that affect me? It only affects me if I allow it to. I mean, I'm not going to say that it shouldn't, but I take that situation. Okay, I got to remember that for future relationships. I really like this guy. Now maybe I do things, and maybe one of these days he changes his mind. But relationships are a two-way street. I can't think that, you know what, I got to keep doing something to make this thing back, because this guy just might have look the other way. He just might say, I don't care. You could give me $1 million. I'm still going to tell you do whatever crap you want. Whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't want to be associated with you, right? And that we have no control over, because it's another human being with free will, just like we have free will. Free will doesn't mean that I can force you to like me if you don't want to, And so those are the things that's I guess that's just being human.
Right. Well, I mean, obviously, there always has to be consent and agency. But the thing is, the point I was trying to make and why it led the way you described the difference between shame and guilt led me to go that route is that, in a way, sometimes you're dealing with external stuff over which guilt is appropriate. And sometimes you're dealing with deeper situations where there's almost like a crisis of identity, like the crisis of the person's own identity, or a crisis in a relationship where, like, does it even like apply for there to be a connection here anymore? And in those situations, you don't really get anywhere through you don't really get so far through a sorry. You kind of have to just get past that entire state of being disconnected and kind of reunite in a state of, like, you have to find a way to get back to the way things were before, where there was this oneness. Like, I'll tell you a story. There's like an old story where one time the king got lost in the forest and he couldn't find his way back, and he was very distraught. And he met this guy in the forest who said, oh yeah, I know the path. And he showed the king back, and the king was so happy about this guy that he basically took him to work for him. And many years passed, and this servant made a big boo-boo and did something that was very wrong, and the king decided that he deserved to be executed. So he's about to be executed, and they ask him, do you have any last wish? And he said, yeah, my last wish is that you and I dress up in the same clothing that we wore the day we first met. And the king says, okay, last wish of a dying man, I'll do it. So the king gets dressed in the same clothing, and he gets dressed in the same clothing. And as they're sitting across from each other, dressed in the same clothing when they first met, the king's like, right, I can't do this to you. And he pardons him. But that's the idea of, like, it's kind of, to get past shame, to get past like an essential disconnect, you have to kind of like rearrange yourself to what you were originally, before you accepted all these, the notion that there was something essentially wrong with you, which there isn't. At the core, there isn't. But you have to get rid of the idea that there was,
Yeah, it's a little, I'm going to say it's even a little bit more complicated, because if let's say you have a baby who can't even talk yet, right? And there you got a single mother who's got other kids, and let's say she's getting ready to go someplace in a car, and she just changes her kids' diapers, right? Puts the kids in the car, grabs the last one, smells. What did you just do? I just changed your diapers. And the mom gets all upset, and the baby doesn't speak, but she understands that she did something wrong, right? And it was a bodily function, right? And if this happens a couple of more times, the baby starts to wonder, wow, it then every time I eliminate something, that must not be good because I'm getting yelled at for it. And, I mean, that's an extreme example, but what I'm trying to show you is that the shame can continue, can begin before we even learn to verbalize things. And so in this sense, somebody really young has had it for so long, they don't know what it feels like not to feel that way. So when we overcome that by forgiving ourselves for we, again, this is a complicated step that I don't normally go into within the first 3 or 4 sessions because it can be difficult to understand. But when we forgive ourselves for believing the horrible thoughts that I am clumsy, that I am unworthy, that I'm whatever you want. That's what we're forgiving ourselves for. We don't know what it feels like not to have those feelings because we've had them for so long that it feels normal to feel bad about ourselves. That's why it's hard for people with shame to change because it's not normal. I feel weird feeling good about myself. You know, I mean, I'm laughing, but I've been in those shoes. I mean, it sounds really absurd, but it's so true for so many people because we don't know anything different because we've been told for so long. I mean, imagine a child whose mother just for some, every time the baby does something, whack, just, backhands the baby because that gets them to stop. But then, oh, I'm sorry, honey. And then they hug them and love them, 5 minutes later, whack, oh, I'm sorry. They're associating some kind of physical abuse with love. They grow up thinking if somebody doesn't do something abusive to me, it's not really love. So then they have friends at school that they kind of, I'm not saying that that they're boyfriend, girlfriend, they're just friends with. Then they go, okay, this person is not abusive. And it's not a conscious thought so much as a subconscious one, but they'll do something to annoy or irritate their friend so that they will be abusive in some way, verbally, or like, come on, or whatever, because now it has this feeling of love or, some kind of relationship. And they get the wrong sense of idea of how a relationship is. Now you take that forward. Now you start to find, somebody that you want to date, you want to be with, and then you do the same thing to them. Or you find somebody that innately knows is going to have some sort of abusive reaction to you. And then you think, why do I always attract these abusive people? Well, it's because you think in some ways, that's where your relationship is. And it's these kinds of things that shame doesn't allow us to see this warped sense of our thinking. And believe me, people don't come to this conclusion. I mean, how many thousands of people are out there that just give up on relationships because every time I'm in one, I swear I'm never going to be in an abusive relationship again. 6 months later, they're there. And that's okay, forget it. I'm not even going to have a relationship. I'm just going to do whatever because they've given up because they don't understand their own thinking that causes the problem. Those are the kind of people that I love to help. I wish they would believe me. I'd spend all day. The stories are sad, but let me tell you, when I can help guide them into that understanding of, wow, you know what? It's not what the other person said, it's what I believed. And that light in their eyes just is like, it's the best gift you could ever have.
Yeah, I mean, the story you told of the day that you had that happen to you and you went home and you're like asking yourself, I mean, I love that story. Everything you're doing, like, and then to be able to like to give other people that spark, and to see that, I mean, that's amazing.
I would meet people for the first time, never, and it was on an unrelated thing, and I'd start talking about shame. I mean, I was such a shame geek, it's like, it didn't matter who you were. I mean, I was not. I'm one of those people who I could never be one of these religions that go knocking on door to door proselyte. I just couldn't do it. But let me tell you, I would have no problem going door to door, knocking on people's, telling them about my shame. It's weird. I really enjoy it. I'll tell strangers, but I realize it's obnoxious, so I don't go doing it. But if it ever comes up, I don't hide it because I really enjoy doing it. It's just one, I don't know how else to describe it besides calling it a shame nerd or something. I really enjoy it.
Well, I think you could go, maybe not to the point of obnoxious, but you can go as far as you possibly can, because I think the message really comes through with you. You're not trying to proselytize. It's just
No,
you.
I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was such a freeing experience. I remember the following Monday after this, I'm not going to go into the story, but I had just done something, and one of my favorite movies for this one part is Braveheart. It's at the very end, when you talk about Mel Gibson's being beheaded, right? And he asked him, "Do you have anything to say?" And he, with his last breath, he just shouts, "Freedom!" Right? I don't know if you remember that or not. Right before he gets beheaded. And I remember driving in my car the next Monday, and I just went, "Freedom!" Because I realized that I was no longer, tied to these horrible ideas of who I was. I mean, did shame still trip me up? Yes, I still deal with it today. But I know the situation. I know that it's there. I know it's trying to do these things. And that freedom of knowing, of the knowledge, is just, that's what I want everybody to experience. That's why I get zealous about it, because I want everybody to shout freedom, but I'm not everybody, and I can only do so much.
Yeah. The experience that comes back for me is when I was not a very happy kid. When I was around 10 or 12 years old, I got on a snowboard for the first time. And I think for the first time in my life, I felt this sense of freedom, this amazing sense of freedom. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I would spend all year long thinking about snowboarding. And I'd only get to go for like a week out of the year, but the rest of the year, that's all I was to think about. And then when I was like 16 or 17, I heard someone who was like talking about these concepts, these Jewish mystical concepts, and they got me hooked. I was like, that also became this freedom for me, these ideas, these like amazing spiritual ideas. And I studied that for a few years, but then after a while, like, I felt like there was something else missing. And over time I pieced, a bunch of things together. And like, I finally feel now it's like, yeah, I can access that state of freedom. Like, I don't feel like I'm blocked anymore. I feel like I can just be who I am and do what I want to do. And a lot of what I'm doing, the thoughts behind the system is that, we all have this, like, whether it's shame or whether it's whatever it else is, like, everyone is, many people are held back by something. There's something holding them back, but they also have this, this idea in their head that they know they can be something different. They know they can be some better version of themselves, but something's holding them back, but it's all kind of muddled and it's not clear what it is. And what I try to do with people is I try to say, what is this person that you want to be? What are they like in all of the different areas of life? And then we talk about that, and we talk about, what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to you that you're exercising, or what does it mean to you that this relationship is better? And then eventually, once you get there, then you start to ask the interesting questions, which is, and I imagine that, like, when you were people, it kind of probably goes in a certain similar direction, which is, so what is the part of you that doesn't want this? What's the part of you that's holding you back? Once you can kind of like make a distinction, okay, this is who I am, where I would wish I'd be. So now you can, from that vantage point, and say, okay, so this is you could start to understand, okay, this is all of the who I am that's wanted me to be how I am now and how I've been all these years. And I never understood why, but now I can look at it more objectively. Now I can understand why. And that process is like where there is this explosion of awareness. It's like, oh my goodness, the reason why I didn't want to take this step forward is because I have all these thoughts about myself. I have all these fears of like, this is what I'd be giving up, or this is what could happen to me, that I realized they're not necessarily true, but things did happen and I have to deal with that, the trauma and the pain and all that. And so that process is like, it almost like it kind of tears apart all the muddled thinking and all the confusion. And at the same time, there's like this, there's a lot of it, like, in a way, it kind of like opens up all this stuff that's been stuck and these memories and these feelings. And so it is such an amazing process, but eventually, like once a person is able to like, then let all that stuff go and feel all these things that they never felt before, it's like now they're no longer held back by that stuff. Now they can like all the things that they want to do with their life that they would imagine having, like now they're there for the taking.
What people don't understand a lot of times is that we've been doing certain things certain ways our whole life, and it's not working because we're not where we want to be. What we have to accept is we may need some help. We may need a little bit of guidance, a little bit of push. We need to invest in it, and that's typically with a therapist, a coach, somebody, and that who is skilled or trained in seeing where these shortcomings are and helping us to help ourselves, like you say. Okay, the thing that I don't want to be the kind of person that is, oh, I got to have my session with John because if I don't, I'm not going to. We need to train people to be their own empowering. Now, doesn't mean that they don't need a boost every now and then. Doesn't mean that they can stop reading books, that they can stop, but we need to empower. I mean, what I tell people is, look, I don't want to have more than this many sessions. I want to have you to the point where in 5, 10, whatever sessions it is, you feel great. I'm experiencing healing. I'm experiencing personal development. Okay. If you want to continue after that because you want to seek higher, because I'm helping you discover more things, great. But I want you to say, I don't want you to be in some ways addicted to the kind of to what I'm telling you, because what have I done? I haven't empowered you. I've only created this insane connection. And so empowering people to be their best version of themselves and know how to do that within, for the most part, that's what I think is the job you and I are to do. Again, if somebody wants to continue, it's because, wow, Ari, your system is really helping me, and I think it's going to help me get there faster. That's why I want to continue, not because, man, if I don't have my Ari this week, it's going to suck. You know what I mean? We can't. If we're that kind of coach, we're creating this dependence rather than an independence and in a personal empowerment that is going to help that person. So yeah. I applaud you for what you're doing on that. That's great.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, it's so invaluable to me because I'm somewhat of an anarchist. Like I when I learn from someone, I go completely into it and I become very much a student and attached to whatever. But at some point, I learned everything I learned and now I'm ready to go on to the next lesson. I think it's important that people are free, you don't want anyone ever, I don't want to be stuck to anybody and I don't want anyone ever to be stuck to me, it's like if I'm helping someone, eventually I want them to be someone who is like people who help me. Now I view them as colleagues, that's how I want people who I'm helping. This is I don't want them to forever be someone who they need to come to me for advice, or like, I want them to be a colleague, maybe someone who eventually I'll need to come to them for advice, because they'll
Right.
out in their own way, they're going to be better than me at something, you know?
Sure. Yeah.
So
That's good. That's excellent. Good
Yeah.
thoughts.
it's awesome. I got to wrap up, but this was awesome.
Okay.
This was fun. To do this again,
Yeah.
maybe.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Keep it in
John. I
mind.
really appreciate it.
All right. All right. Thank you. Me too.
Okay. Okay.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Peace.